Okay, good morning, everybody. We've got a few folks still coming in, so I'm going to do a little bit of different intro here. I'm Perry Clausen, Executive Director of the East San Joaquin Coalition.
Katie Campadonico, East San Joaquin.
Mike Johnson, MLJ Environmental. We do technical work for the coalition.
If you have your agenda handy, at the very top in a black bar is a phone number. So many of you can text these days. I know my 86-year-old mother texts quite well, so I don't know if age can be a barrier to that, but I would appreciate if you would text questions to us. Katie will be getting those questions, and we will try to answer as many of those as we can. We'll also have Brittany wandering around with a microphone, so that'll give us those a chance that don't have a text or want to ask the question, the chance to ask it in person. The other thing that we're going to do is create a follow-up newsletter, our ESJ update, and try to answer the questions that we didn't answer and actually repeat many of them because obviously some members were not able to come to this meeting. So we'll be able to do that in a follow-up newsletter. And then at the end of the meeting today, we are going to have a member of the Regional Water Quality Control Board talk about the domestic well program and an overview of the sampling. So the questions on that subject, please hold to the end or text them and we'll hold them here until Bob Ditto comes up to give his presentation. I want to hand it over to Katie, and she's going to explain some of the things you got in your handout.
Okay, so in your handouts, you got your annual report, which is the booklet. You also got an agenda for the day, and that has that phone number to text if you have any questions. So if you see me looking down and texting back, I'm trying to answer questions too. And you also had a half sheet, which is a ballot, and there's 3 board members of the East San Joaquin board that are up for re-election. They're all 3 growers. So if you take the time to fill that in, or we welcome write-ins as well. If you'd like to go ahead and fill those out and then drop them back out front on your way in, that would be great. So again, we've got the member packets again this year. Many of you walked in holding them. They look very similar to they have in years past. Some of the differences you're going to see is there's no farm evaluation requirement this year, so 1 less requirement. And everything is due again on March 1st this year. Member assistance workshops, we're continuing with these open office hours, so if you'd like to come see me, Brittany, get help with your information, filling out your packet. You can come in Mondays and Tuesdays to the Stanislaus County Farm Bureau office between 10 and 2. We'll always be there on Mondays and Tuesdays. Otherwise, just give us a call and make an appointment just to make sure we're there. We are kind of out and about running around. We've got a lot of growers to cover, so give us a call, make an appointment, make sure that we're there. Web portal, we're continuing with our online web portal, which gives you 24/7 access. You can go online anytime. To complete your member requirements. So here's some of the stuff that you'll see on your dashboard. You can complete your summary report. In years past, you've been able to complete your farm evaluation as well. And number 7, you'll see that in that bottom corner. That's a document repository, so you can pull up prior years of your summary reports, look them over in case you need to refer back, make sure your plans are similar, or just check back in, see what you've done in the past. Your member information, you can update parcels, acreage, crop, contact information, all can be done through the portal. It also has that calendar of events, so you can go check those workshop dates, meeting dates, etc.
Okay, one other reminder is you're going to see slides throughout the presentation with that little annotation on the bottom. So when some of these slides may be hard to see, so go to your member annual report on the page number you see at the bottom for the information that's on that slide, and oftentimes more elaborate explanation. So it's 16 years, everyone, that we've been coming to these meetings and doing this for most of you, many of you, and we're staying about the same with the acreage numbers, about 3,300 members, just over 700,000 acres in the coalition region. Last year was very eventful, as we talked about at the meetings. Last year, we were waiting for the adoption of our general order. That did happen on February 4th, and it's official with our new requirements. This was a result of petitions that were filed against our order in 2012. And yesterday, day before yesterday, we had all the other coalitions in the Central Valley had their orders adopted, similar almost exactly to what our order is. So all the other, your neighbors and other counties throughout the Central Valley all have the exact same requirements we do. They're behind us, and some of them a year to 2 years. But bottom line is that the requirements that we have in the East San Joaquin are going to be the same throughout Central California. One thing that has shown itself worth doing is this coalition approach. When we were working on revising the East San Joaquin order, we had all 12 of the other coalitions working with us to try to minimize the amount of reporting and frankly to try to get the best deal we could from the regional water board. So it really has shown in our experience through these years that this approach, the coalition approach versus individual reporting, is a far better way to approach regional water board regulations. We have a model on the Central Coast that shows how maybe that doesn't work. They don't have a coalition similar to what we have on the Central Coast Agriculture, Salinas Valley, Santa Maria, San Luis. They have a kind of a group that does the surface water monitoring only, but they don't have any group that does outreach, helping with report filling out and such. And over the years, they've had pretty extreme pesticide issues similar to what we had in 05, 6, and 7, but they continue to have those problems. And they are getting a new order that's going to be based on our presidential order in 2020. And a couple of months ago, Central Coast Regional Board proposed edge of field monitoring as a way to solve these surface water issues. I had a strawberry grower, fairly sizable grower over there, tell me that that would cost his operation between $200 and $300 an acre to put edge of field sampling for storm events and irrigation return. So whether or not they get a third party going by 2020 is still unknown, but I just know today that this approach of us working on your behalf is proving to be a better way to comply with these regulations. So the challenge today is nitrogen management. Nitrates in groundwater is something that's not just East San Joaquin issue, it's all California irrigated agriculture. Central Coast has the issue, Southern California, certainly in our area. It's going to be a challenge that we've all got to figure out how to best manage over the coming years. So our order didn't make it through without getting challenged. There was two activist groups that challenged the East San Joaquin order that was passed in February. They are primarily disagreeing with something that we were able to negotiate, and that is that your fertilizer report information goes into the Regional Water Board with an anonymous identifier. So even though they have our member list, they have everybody's name that are in the coalition, the reports that we're going to turn in will have an anonymous number next to your crop, acreage, and the amount of fertilizer applied. Activists did not like that. They took it to the California Superior Court, which is the next stop for any kind of litigation against our order. And what is already shown is a judge is not going to do a stay of the new order. In other words, what we have adopted now is going to stay in effect until they decide, make the determination on whether or not this information needs to become public. So that the good news, if you will, at all in this is these lawsuits can take years. It could be 2, 3, 4, 5 years before we get a result out of this. But the point being is we're having to spend coalition resources to lawyer up, if you will, to push back. Many of the other coalitions in the valley are also joining in that work and that cost to push back on those actions that were filed. So the other point that is really our theme, if you will, is that the nitrate in drinking water has become even continues to become a higher level issue in Sacramento and statewide. We have strategies. I'm going to go over what we're talking about in irrigated agriculture. Dairy is working similar on what they are going to be doing differently in coming years. But really our issue primarily, I believe, is legacy nitrates. We have 100 years of farming and other activities, cities as well, that are causing the accumulation of nitrates in groundwater. So correcting that is going to take decades. The regional water board, state water board understands that. But what is now pushed to the top of the critical list is user protection. They are adamant that we get user protection for people that are drinking high nitrate water. That's not only yourself as a farmer living on the land, but if we have rentals and some of these small communities around the valley who have wells impacted by high nitrates. So another thing has happened in the past year to two that I wanted to explain, give you an overview of how the State Water Board Office of Enforcement is now weighing in on this nitrates in groundwater problem. Some of you probably heard about this. In 2016, the Office of Enforcement sent a letter to the 19 largest landowners in Salinas Valley and sent them a threatened cleanup and abatement order. Cleanup and abatement is an action that the State Water Board takes typically and historically against leaky gas tanks and gas stations. They've used that most commonly over the last 10 years, where it says, you stop doing what you're doing, leaking, and you clean it up. So these 19 growers got a draft cleanup and abatement order from the Office of Enforcement that said, unless you figure out a way to provide drinking water to the residents in Salinas Valley who have high nitrates, you're going to get one of these cleanup and abatement orders. Every one of you farmers, plus not the 19 only, but all other farmers in Salinas Valley. What they were able to do was negotiate a settlement agreement with the state board, which involved, if growers set up this drinking water solution, that then they would be protected against any further cleanup and abatement orders against those growers in Salinas Valley. But what they had to do at the end of the day was create a program and pay for bottled water to be provided to any individual resident and small system resident whose well was impacted with nitrates. So they are on year 2 of that program right now. So then what happened about a year ago was the state board felt success, so they went to the Tulare Lake Basin, sent 200 letters to the largest growers over on the eastern side of Tulare County, and essentially did the same thing. Either you get a cleanup and abatement order, or develop a drinking water program for houses and areas, communities that are impacted with nitrates. It took them about a year, a little over a year, and they came up with a settlement agreement. And instead of providing bottled water like Salinas Valley, they are going to be developing kiosk water refill stations in these small communities that are being impacted by nitrates. This is around east of Visalia, Orosi, and that band on the eastern side of Tulare County. So the one thing about cleanup and abatement orders that our attorneys tell us about is it's bad enough to get one of those as a landowner, but if in the development of that order, you have to do studies, you have to track your nitrogen use, you have to do a lot of things based on that order, which all becomes public information. So the fear of that is that there would be third-party lawsuits filed against the growers that said, all right, I'll do a cleanup and abatement order. All that information about your operation is then available for use in future lawsuits. So it was kind of a leverage that was used to convince people that it was growers that it was better to do a settlement agreement and try to get protection from any future cleanup and abatement orders. So you know where this is going. 2 weeks ago, I was in a meeting with a member of the Office of Enforcement, and she said, you're next. East San Joaquin area, Stanislaus, Merced County, growers, I don't know who's going to get the letters, but we're going to expect to get letters and sent to us with the same strategy. Threaten cleanup and abatement orders, or develop a drinking water program. And it won't just be our region. From my understanding, there's some areas targeted north of here, even in southern Sacramento Valley, possibly even Madera County. But we do know that we are next in line to get letters in regards to these enforcement actions. So the activist groups that are filing these petitions, I don't have their names in my head. But they represent what's called the disadvantaged communities. So it's not the environmentalists. There is a group called Coast Keeper that has filed against us, and then the representatives of the disadvantaged community lobby in Sacramento. All right, so then in the meantime of all of this happening, there was many in agriculture and the water board that knew that our weakness from a standpoint of how do we continue farming when we know in some areas we're leaking nitrate past the groundwater. So about 10 years ago, a process was started called CV salts. And the idea behind that was to create a basin plan, which is the law that regulates the water board, a basin plan amendment that would say, if we're doing everything we can to minimize nitrate leaching, if we set up programs to where people who are drinking high nitrate water get made whole, then we're enabled to continue farming while we work on improving our nitrogen efficiency, improving the types of practices that we use in agriculture. So the Regional Water Board adopted this Basin Plan Amendment on May 31st of last year. It is now sitting in front of the State Water Board, ready to be considered in April of 2019. And again, in your annual report, you'll see a 2-page document that has a lot more information on what CV salts is. It started out with salts about 10 years ago. The focus was on figuring out what are we going to do with all the salt accumulation that's happening in the valley. About 5 years ago, it made a 90-degree turn to nitrates. Again, from pressure from the same groups that have actually sued us in these other proceedings. So CV salts is quite a complicated issue. I've got a 5-minute video that was taped for some of the other folks that are sitting around the table with myself and others, and we'll see if we can roll that real quickly. I got one more slide while he's prepping. So in the CV salts arena, there was some studies done of the high nitrate areas in the Central Valley. The map you see here behind you indicates the darker colors is where the higher nitrates are. The area right in the center is where we're sitting, and then down in Tulare Lake area. And out of all these basins, Department of Water Resource, sub-basins and basins, they identified the areas that had the highest nitrates. 3 of the 6 priority areas are in this area, is in our East San Joaquin region, Turlock, Modesto, and Chowchilla. In the south, it's the Kings River Basin, Tule, and Cahuilla, where these priority management zones will be developed.
This Central Valley is probably the single densest area of agricultural production, certainly in the country and probably on the planet. We depend on nitrate to grow our food. It's used as fertilizer. A little bit of excess nitrogen over 150 years adds up to be a lot of nitrogen, and it seeps into the groundwater. But it finally reached a level where it crossed our safety threshold for drinking water. And once you're across the safe drinking water threshold, you run out of options. You have to do something about this, and you have to do it now.
Large cities, those water systems are all regulated for nitrates, and if they didn't meet those water quality requirements, they put in treatment, or they found another water supply, they solved it. In small rural communities, they don't often have the same infrastructure. And in those areas, it's much more difficult to fix a distributed problem that affects lots of different people in lots of different wells than it is one system in a large urban setting.
What we're trying to do with CV salts is to figure out a way in which we can keep generations of farmers in business producing the food and fiber of the valley and protect water quality as well.
Regional Water Quality Control Board for the Central Valley adopted a Basin Plan Amendment to their Water Quality Control Plan, which says we seriously expect people to have a plan for how they're going to demonstrate compliance with the water quality standards, including nitrate in this region. Frankly, anybody that uses water or releases water is going to be affected by these new regulations. And so they're in the room trying to figure out how they can work together to solve the problem.
So I think at the end of the day, we're going to have to come up with some sort of regional approach to doing this. Because I just think
the issue and the problem that we face in groundwater has occurred over decades. And we are where we're at because of lack of action. We need to address the water quality problem in the groundwater. We also need to do it in a way that farmers like myself and my son can continue to farm.
So the new basin management plan for nitrates has 2 options available. One of them is the same old option that's always existed, simply meet the drinking water standard at your point of discharge. So for the vast majority, that's not really an option at all. Option 2, the new option available, is to form management zones.
So the concept of a management zone is all of the people inside of that geographic boundary work together to provide drinking water to those who don't have quality drinking water. In exchange for that, they get flexibility in how they meet the nitrate requirements, therefore giving them both financial incentive and the regulatory compliance to be able to continue farming or continue their wastewater treatment plant. The local of that gives you the efficiency.
Rather than the state coming in and saying, this is how you comply, what we're proposing is for the local areas to join together and figure out how is the most efficient way for you to comply and achieve this goal, which is safe drinking water and an economically viable Central Valley.
We have a couple of areas that have been working on this now for a year or two, and they're teaching us from their experience the problems they run into that we want to avoid in the future. Everything about the economy of this region depends on us getting this right, so that it's less expensive and easier for the next ones to do it.
And so I think the first steps have really taken place in this process, is understanding those. Now we have to actually implement it.
I think the really fortunate circumstance that we have is that our world-class nitrate problem in groundwater is matched by world-class agricultural operations, world-class dairy operations, world-class wastewater treatment operations, world-class scientists. So if anybody can solve this problem, we can. You'll end up with a pretty good solution a lot sooner that works a lot better than you could possibly imagine.
Okay, as part of CV Salts, there was some funding made available to develop some pilot management zones. And the idea with the pilots is try to figure out how are these going to be created, answer the basic questions, what are the boundaries, what are the steering committees, what are the activities that'll need to be done. We were able to apply and get half of that funding for the Turlock subbasin, which encompasses the city of Turlock and the 2 GSAs that are in process of being developed. And then the second one is in the Kings River area. We've got our first steering committee meeting next week, where we're going to try to figure out what it's going to take to organize this option in this area. The April hearing at the state board, we're hoping to be able to say, look, state board, adopt this. Don't send it back. Don't make it worse. And show progress in these two areas. Personally, the Turlock area will be involved with, and also not as much the Kings River. We've got other coalitions working that. So one other question to put forward to everyone for their understanding, because we get this question a lot. The new groundwater sustainability authorities, the SGMA, everything that's out there with this water supply. It's like, where does a coalition fit in with these GSAs, the SGMA process? We've had some very, what would you call it, active discussions in our board about where we need to plug into these. And to tell you the truth, we're not quite sure yet. We know we've got our mandates with the regional water board. The SGMA process is the Department of Water Resources. So it's almost like a different silo in Sacramento mandates that program. We're under the authority of the Regional Water Board. That's a fundamental difference that may be hard to overcome, and we may need to say separate, but I don't know. None of us really know what is going to be the best approach for this. I just know one thing, my farm in Parler, your farms around here, we're in the SGMA, whether we want to or not. We are going to be regulated under a groundwater sustainability authority at some point. So how we all fit together, that yet to be decided and determined in our area. So I'm going to now just kind of shift gears a little bit. We're going to talk about strategies for this challenge of nitrates in groundwater. There's three more or less big efforts that are going to be going forward. One is the crop coefficients. What is the number, what is the amount of nitrogen I remove from my crop when I take the yield off? How much is left over that may potentially leach to groundwater? That's a whole level of discussion we're going to have. The next one is, how do we track progress? We're setting up a trend monitoring network throughout our region, throughout the Central Valley. and then what's the number we're trying to reach. And in this new order, there's a section called groundwater protection targets. And essentially what those are is a way to measure where are we now in our groundwater basins, and then how much improvements need to be made, if any at all. So we're going to go into detail on all of those. But one thing that I want everyone to understand, it may be implicit already, is when we had our pesticide issues back in the 2005s and early on in our program, we had the pesticide industry, they had our back. They have legions of PhD scientists. They helped us fund research. We tried to figure out what is it that we do to keep pesticides out of water. Fertilizer, very different. A nitrogen fertilizer that's in my 21714 could be made by any of a number of commodity type nitrogen makers. So when they find nitrogen under my nectarine orchard, they can't say, oh, that's made by Dow AgroSciences or Syngenta. Nobody knows who the origins are of that nitrate. So what we are it's up to us as agriculture to figure out what is the right crop coefficient. Because so far, the fertilizer manufacturers have been taking arm's length away from this. We do have funding through CDFA, the FREP program, Fertilizer Research Education Program, which comes out of the tax that we pay when we buy fertilizer. But what it's coming down to is what's the right number? And Mike's going to talk more detail about what these crop coefficients are. There's two sources of this information right now. It's the University of California and their studies and the fertilizer suppliers. And then our options to prove these numbers are correct is do we fund our own research? Do we rely on our commodity groups? Almond Board's doing a great job with it, but as you go down the commodity list, not so much the other groups. Walnuts and pistachios, pretty good as well. So the challenge we have, or the thought we need to always bring forward, is we want to make sure we have the best numbers because that's what we're going to be graded on. So as you listen to this, Mike's explanation, kind of keep that in mind.
As Perry said, that we have to work with crop coefficients, and I sort of preface this by saying that essentially everything that we're going to do with respect to nitrogen management and reporting of nitrogen and all that sort of thing really has to do with the amount of nitrogen applied and the amount of nitrogen removed. Those are the two basic pieces of information, and everything that we do is going to build off of those. So it's very important that we get a good understanding of the amount of nitrogen that's applied. That's part of your, this year, your nitrogen management plan summary report. We need that information. Next year, I think Katie will explain, it's a slightly different form, but we need that information. On the other hand, we also need to understand the amount of the nitrogen that's removed from your fields, your orchards, your vineyards during harvest. The amount of nitrogen removed is all based off of your yield. And then, as Perry mentioned, there is a number that we use to convert your yield to the amount of nitrogen removed, okay? The idea being that if you have, basically you put on the same amount, the amount that you apply and the amount that you remove is the same, then you have no potential to leach to groundwater. So the bigger the difference between the amount that you apply and the amount that you remove, that gives you an increased probability that you're going to be leaching nitrate to groundwater. Okay, so as Perry mentioned, we have a series of numbers. The University of California developed a whole group of numbers. Some of the numbers are pretty good, as he mentioned. I'm going to show you some pictures here in a minute. And some of them probably need some work. So those crop coefficients that we use convert your yield to the amount of nitrogen removed. And as an example, suppose we take, you have almonds and we have 2,000 pounds of kernels. Then if the crop coefficient is 0.068, that was developed by Dr. Patrick Brown, in cooperation with the Almond Board. And it's a good number. He worked on it for years, and which means that with 2,000 pounds of kernels, you're removing 136 pounds of nitrogen per acre. Okay? That also takes into account the amount that's sequestered in the trees, in permanent tissue, and the amount that comes off in the shells and the hulls. Okay? Now, the almond coefficient, as Perry mentioned earlier, the almond coefficient is quite good. Dr. Brown worked for a long, long time. He's still working to sort of perfect those numbers. Some of the other numbers are perhaps not so good. The University of California didn't really rank them. They just kind of gave they said this number is very variable, this number is not so variable. And so we went through, and the coalition went through, and we ranked them with respect to they're good, they're reasonable, or they're poor. Currently, in the immediate future, we don't have any plans to spend, with all the other things we're doing, we don't have any plans to spend additional money to try to improve those crop coefficients in the next couple of years. We're going to live with the ones that we got, and I'll show you why here in just a second. But if you have a commodity and you have a commodity group that would like to get involved in helping us improve those crop coefficients, those nitrogen removed coefficients for your crop, the coalition would love to work with those commodity groups and improve those numbers. And by the way, this says here on pages 11 through 13 of your annual report, there's some information on the crop coefficients. Again, the crop coefficient means we take your yield, we multiply it by a number. For the almonds, it was 0.068, and then that converts it to the pounds of N removed. And the pounds of N removed is critical. That's one of the basic pieces of information that we're going to work with every year. We have to have crop coefficients for 95% of our crops by March of 2021 and 99% of our crops by March of 2023. So if you think about the actual numbers of commodity, the crops that have good numbers, less than 50% of our crops have good numbers. However, the good part of this, and again, this is on pages 11 through 13 of your annual report if you've got that handy, about 75% of our acreage in the East San Joaquin region have good numbers. Another 21% have reasonable numbers. And there's about 5% that we consider poor, or we have no numbers at all, and we're going to have to work to get those numbers somehow. Other coalitions in other regions, their numbers don't look quite so good, so they're going to have to scramble. But as far as our acreage goes, we're actually doing pretty well, which is why we're going to stand on the numbers we have for the time being. And here's just a list of the ones that are good, the reasonable, and the poor, and then the ones that aren't available at all. So again, if you've got a commodity group that wants to work on those poor and not available crop coefficients, we would welcome that help. Okay, so there's two ways that you can work with A's and R's. You can subtract R from A. And again, if you put on a certain amount and you remove exactly that amount, that A minus R is going to be 0. If you continue to decrease the A minus R over time, if we as a coalition, all of our members decrease their A minus R, that means that we all have a lower potential to leach to groundwater, which means that we're going to see some improvement in groundwater quality. Our problem is that, as you heard in the video, these things took decades to accumulate, and it could take decades to clean up.
So, quick question on that I just came across is, how long does it take this water with nitrates to get to the aquifer?
It depends on soil type. So you got sandy soil and you got shallow groundwater, it could be there next year. If you've got a deeper aquifer and you've got heavier ground, it could take decades, literally. There could be decades of nitrate in the soil profile between the surface and groundwater itself. It's going to take a long time for that to kind of flush its way down and get diluted out. So that's one of our problems, is that when I'll get to trend monitoring in a minute, it's difficult to say that we're going to clean this up in 5 years or 10 years. But the key here, the bottom line here, the key is improving management practices that will reduce the difference of A and R, right? We're trying to cut down that difference. Okay, another way that you can look at A's and R's is you can take the ratio of A over R, and if you remove the same amount as you apply, that ratio is going to be 1. We're going to use that ratio, or at least we're proposing propose to the regional board here very shortly that we're going to use that ratio to determine outliers. And over the last few years, as you've gotten back your nitrogen use evaluation reports, some of you we've talked to about being outliers and management units being outliers. Okay, we're going to change the way we do it this year. We're going to use the interquartile range method, which is just a statistical method, and I'm not going to go through it. If you're interested in how it works, I'm more than happy to talk about it. I love talking about statistics that generally nobody else in the world does, so we're just going to skip over it. But what it means is that there will no longer be a fixed percentage of growers each year that will have to be outliers. So if everybody's performance is good, there will be no outliers. Okay, here's a quick example. This is almond data from Coalition from the last couple of years. There were 2,060 management units. We did the method, we used this interquartile range method, and if your A over R was greater than or equal to 2.29, then you became an outlier. And you can see that there were 105 outliers, although there were a few outliers actually below, at the very low end. So about 5% of the reported management units were considered outliers. And here, this is the standard box and whisker plot that you've seen, that we've shown you in the past.
Mike, 1 second. Go ahead.
Go back that last slide. Okay, and I'm looking at that, and the A over R, if you're putting on the right nitrogen for the amount that is removed, it should be at 1.
That is true. So the question was, if you put on a certain amount and you remove that exact same amount, that A over R value should be 1, and that is correct.
A lot of values up there.
There's a lot of values up there. The goal will be to get those outliers down back toward the middle of that box and whisker plot, toward that big blue stripe there in the center. If we can drop and get all of those outliers back low, that would be a fairly significant accomplishment with respect to reduction of leaching.
And then you're also asking or stating that you want to get the A to R down. You're not saying below 1.
No.
No, the regional board here isn't here to talk about A's and R's and all that sort of thing, but there is no target for A over R that has ever been proposed. Now, can we get it down to 1? I don't think we can even get it down to 1. There's going to be a little bit of loss for all kinds of reasons. We will talk about that here in a minute with respect to the groundwater targets and that sort of thing.
The goal is to try to move those that are way above what the average is. So the average is the bright bar. It's still almost 2. But we're not, again, the data, we don't know why. These are early data analysis, and we're all scratching our head to try to interpret what this means. All we know is we ran the data, plotted it, and this is what we came up with. So that we've got more to do to evaluate what's going on with that.
So there's a couple new things here in your packet. So if you've looked through your packet, you've noticed some differences on your new worksheet. Your previous nitrogen management plan worksheet is now the irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet. This is still kind of the same deal. You're going to complete this and keep it on farm. And then you also have a summary report. Your summary report this year that you need to complete by March 1st and turn back into us does look the same as last year. So this is your new nitrogen management plan, or irrigation and nitrogen management plan worksheet. It's now 3 pages instead of the booklet that we produced last year. The first page, the cover page, looks very similar to the cover page of your summary report or Form 3. So it's asking you to put things into management units, APNs, county. This is all listed on this page that you can break down further into your next page, your summary or your worksheet itself. The far side of your worksheet there has all the questions that were previously on your farm evaluation. So you've seen those questions before, those aren't new. In the bottom corner there also has what was previously on the worksheet as well. So you've seen most of the stuff on here. The new things ask for evapotranspiration numbers and anticipated crop irrigation. So these are new. We recommend that you look to your UC Cooperative Extension to kind of get those evapotranspiration numbers, look at local CIMMYS data. And anticipated crop irrigation and evapotranspiration, we recommend putting in a range because we never know in March what's going to happen throughout our summer and irrigation season. So putting in a range there is perfectly acceptable. This is the new summary report. You won't get this until November, but we just want to let you know that next year your summary report is going to look a little bit different, and it's going to take those numbers that are on this worksheet, and you're going to put them onto your summary report when you report your 2019 data. All right, so that is kind of your gist there, but your summary report that you're turning in March this year does look the same as it did last year, and you're looking at last year's data, so you're looking at 2018 and reporting on your summary report that's due this March. Then this is going to be on your summary report next year too. It's going to ask for those irrigation and nitrogen management practices. And again, in March this year, we're going to send out that outlier packet, or that packet that compares where you are with your nitrogen use, comparing you to other growers in your area. So you'll be getting that in March, and remember that's an informational thing. Definitely look through it, talk to your PCA. That's going to show you where you are in comparison with other growers in your area.
Yeah, so the idea with that summary is to compare you with growers of the same crop, the amount that you're applying and the yield, and then again, comparing you to what the crop coefficients are that the UC Cooperative Extension has developed through the research that they've done. And again, if you've got a commodity group that's on that low level, I think it's time to start looking at those numbers and making sure that we've got the most accurate numbers to represent you.
Okay, there was a question texted in that was essentially, will there be crop coefficients for amount of pounds of cow produced and manure added and that sort of thing? Basically, sort of a pasture question, because that's been a problem for us for a long time. That's a work in progress. So the regional board has engaged the UC Cooperative Extension, and they're trying to come up with a process that we can use to sort of estimate all of those things adequately. Okay, groundwater trend monitoring program. This is a brand new thing. I've warned you about this over the last couple of years. I promised that eventually we would have a trend monitoring program. Well, we now have a trend monitoring program. We did our first round of monitoring in this last fall, 2018. And what we do is in the original groundwater assessment report that we did in 2014, we gathered all of the groundwater data that we could to assess groundwater quality. And now, over the course of time, we're moving forward with our trend monitoring program, and we have a baseline, and we're now going to be seeing how things change out into the future. We have 12 wells in our network. They're all domestic supply wells. They're all in the upper aquifer, which means they're relatively shallow, not first encounter, but they're relatively shallow. We're going to be adding 4 wells to that list. We still need additional wells. Our problem isn't for lack of volunteer. You guys have all volunteered. A lot of you have volunteered your wells. Our problem is that we need a substantial amount of information about your well in order to include it in our program. So if you have a well, we'll look at these. There's some areas there with some red circles. I'm going to have another slide here in a minute. This is also on page 16 of your annual report. If you have well completion reports, so we know the depth, the screening interval, what the casing's like, the seal, all those sorts of things. If you've got that information and you haven't yet volunteered your well, we would love to hear from you. And I have some business cards. If you want to talk to me, I'll hand you out a business card with one of our staff people in my office in Davis, and we can sort of set you up. So here's our basic results on the map, and what you can see, I hope, it's a little hard, but I think you can see it. There's sort of a light purple area over the map. That's our high vulnerability area, and that means that's the area where we have nitrate in groundwater at a concentration higher than the MCL, the drinking water standard, which is 10 milligrams per liter nitrate as nitrogen. I'm going to go to the next slide here. The good news from my perspective, I thought I was actually very surprised that we would actually see this out of the 12 wells that we selected, which were not selected with respect to any trying to find them in a location that we would have better results or not as good results. 9 of the 12 wells actually came in at numbers below that 10 milligram per liter, that red line there, which means they're below the drinking water standard. We have 3 that came in above. The 10, there's a 12, there's a 20, and then there's a 62. And the 62 is the area around Turlock, which is the management zone, the area that Perry talked about a little earlier. Okay, so up here we need wells in those 2 areas. Again, this is on page 17 of your annual report. You can get a better look at it there. So in the Waterford area, Stevenson area, if you've got a well that we have a lot of information about, please come and contact me. And here's the ones farther down south. So if you've come up from down south here for the meeting, if you've got a well in one of these areas, please get in touch. This is on page 18. Yes, so if you volunteer your well and it's a domestic supply well that you need to monitor for the drinking water program, the coalition will cover the cost of the monitoring for you, and we will take care of it. Okay, so one of the things is that every coalition has to have a trend monitoring program. It's all in their order. And so what we did was most of the coalitions, not all, but most of the coalitions banded together and formed what they call the Central Valley Groundwater Monitoring Collaborative. In other words, it's just a group of coalitions who have gone together, sort of pooled their resources. And the goal is to sort of cut the costs to their members. And each of us conducts our own monitoring program, but then we pool the data. And then in the end, at the end of 5 years, we have to have a sort of regional groundwater characterization. And we can save a great deal of money if we actually come together, have a consultant come in and do that for everybody at the same time.
Okay, before we get on to this subject, there's a couple questions that came through. So if you're near a river, stream, canal that has fresh water running through it, the recharge that you get from that water helps dilute the nitrates. We have found in the testing we've done so far that the aquifer, that water that's soaking in, is actually helping dilute the nitrates in your area. Now, how quickly it gets to the nitrates is similar to what Mike answered earlier, that depending on the soil types, completely dependent on the soil type, the amount of nitrates that it's excess, and the amount of rainfall and irrigation. So that is a variable that will be adjusted. So what happens at the end of 5 years if we see no improvement? Well, improvement is going to be measured in reducing, moving that line of outliers down. We are going to be proposing performance metrics to the Regional Water Board on what does improvements mean. We do know, and I believe they acknowledge, it's going to take decades for the water quality to improve in these aquifers. There's simply too much nitrates that have accumulated over the past century, if you will, for that to improve. One of the ways that this will be tracked is through these groundwater protection formulas, values, and targets. And the way to think about this, we have an illustration here to show you what we're talking about. So we have the crop on the surface, we have the applied nitrogen and the removed, then the excess can potentially move down to the aquifer you see below. But there's a lot of variables, as you can imagine, between that crop and that groundwater. You could have clay layers. You could have redux where there's actually pH and other things that could degrade the nitrates. You've got the recharge from irrigation, rainfall, and nearby rivers can cause that level to change. So the charge with the regional, with this new plan, is that we will do these groundwater protection targets on a township basis. So a 36 square mile area, all the farms in those areas, and we'll be looking at the A-R and then use existing data, maybe refine later, of the clay layers, estimate the irrigation applied, and try to come up with what'll be the value. So we're still working on this. This is one of the most complicated subjects we've ever put our heads around. But the formula is where we're trying to develop now. What goes into that calculation that essentially gives you a value, the answer. Once you know the value and the answer, then what's the target? Do we need to get better? Are we fine, or are we even below? So those are the questions that still need to be answered. The reason we're taking this on, it seems really complicated. It is, but we had a debate, if you will. The activists did not think that we were providing a program where we would eventually see improvements in groundwater quality just by tracking what we're doing, reducing outliers and such. So they said, how are you going to meet groundwater targets and water quality standards in the aquifers? So we came up with this approach as an offset to them suing us, frankly. And it's going to be difficult to develop, but we think that this is going to be an approach. It will be refined over the years that will eventually give us the answer of where are we now and how much do we need to improve. So the formula needs to be scientifically based. We're relying on hydrogeologists and geologists to help us do that. All the coalitions are working on this. We have to propose the formula to the regional water board, the state water board, a year from July. And then the formula will come up with this value, which will be determined by, as I mentioned, the N applied and N removed. And then we create these values for each parcel. And then it's reported on a township basis. And then the target, again, it's just what are we shooting for? 10 milligrams per liter is the drinking water standard. We're going to find out how far we are from that or if we are meeting that. In some areas with enough recharge, enough groundwater recharge, as well as storms recharge from storm events, rivers, and irrigation, excess irrigation can help us in diluting those nitrates. So the targets will need to be developed a year after we proposed those to the state water board. Okay, so now we're going to shift gears and talk about the farming aspect of all this. So we talk about this every year, but it's worth repeating. It's really, I think, the most logical approach that's been developed by the fertilizer industry, by agriculture actually around the world. It's called the 4 R's. They apply to any crop. There isn't a crop yet that we found where these don't have a practical application. When is the right time to apply nitrogen fertilizer? What's the right rate? What's the right type of nitrogen that we use, and where do you place it to get the most efficient uptake? It sounds easy, but of course we know it's complicated. The inputs of nitrates that we have in farming right now, obviously the fertilizer we apply, there could be nitrates in the groundwater, irrigation water, soil nitrates, organic material that's going to play a certain role. There's a fixation of that nitrate by the microorganisms in the soil, and then we're adding compost and manures. So then the outputs, again, some of them we can estimate or know pretty quickly is the crop harvest, the plant biomass that's also left in the field. We got to figure out where is that available for the next crop? What's the soil organic matter content in the soil? And then there are gas losses. Studies have been done that show that can range from 1 to 10%. It isn't 50%. We're not gassing off nitrates at that high a level. That's been confirmed. But there can be gas losses from nitrates. And then nitrate leaching, that's the component that we're really watching closely. So the best work on this has been done with a collaboration of the Department of Food and Agriculture and the University Cooperative Extension. It's these fertilizer guidelines. When you came in, we had the handouts for the most common crops. And what this does is it essentially covers the 4 R's of when is a plant using these nitrates. Each of these these brochures will have the crop consumption curves, which have been developed by research. And they essentially say, when is that plant taking up the nitrate? When is the time that you apply so you can efficiently use that nitrogen by the crop? And then when is that tree or crop not using nitrates? So this integrates 3 of the 4 R's. The only one it doesn't incorporate is the type of nitrogen, but your crop advisor and their supplier can talk to you about which ones are the least likely to not be used by the crop and leached into groundwater. Now, one thing that we do have in our favor is that CV Salts looked at and did some studies of how are we going to clean up this water? Is there an industrial solution to that? End of the day, it was decided there's no way that we can pump all that water up, clean out the nitrates, put the water back in the ground. That's just simply unaffordable to do. Actually, our best way to clean up our aquifers are from two things. We pump that high nitrate water out of the ground, we put it on our crops, that crop takes the nitrate out. The second one we have no control over, that's rainfall. It's dilution of that water in the aquifer. And these SGMA programs at some point I believe will help us by adding more fresh water to our aquifers, will help in the dilution. But one thing to remember with pump and fertilize, if you have, as an example here, you got water that tests 35 parts per million, you estimate, okay, I put 30 inches of water on my crop, I've got 236 pounds of nitrogen. Well, not so much. So the problem is if you can have 236 pounds available, but you've got to use all 30 inches of water in that tree or crop. That's having 100% water use efficiency, which I don't think anybody has. We get pretty close in the 90%. But the point being is that the amount of nitrogen that your crop takes out of that water is very dependent on when that water is applied, what that tree is using or crop using of water, and then the root system efficiency of taking up that water. So it's something just to keep in mind. I know I've heard of people saying, well, I don't need to fertilize anymore, I've got 230 pounds. Well, they have a yellow tree or a yellow crop. It's because that tree is not taking up 236 pounds, and it may need 250 pounds of nitrogen. So it's something that we need to be aware of, and each circumstance is going to be a little bit different. Okay, so what's the best way to accomplish the 4 R's? Certified crop advisors that are working for us now can help us implement the 4 R's. They're getting trained in that. That's part of their continuing education. The questions to ask, how do I maintain acceptable yields, maybe reduce nitrogen use if I need to. If we're using nitrogen efficiently, we may not need to reduce the amount of nitrogen we apply. And then, at the end of the day, if I have some different things to do, how much is it going to cost? So the groundwater growers in high vulnerability areas do have the option of being self-certified. And I'll have Katie talk about that for a minute.
Okay, so we're working on planning some nitrogen management plan self-certification courses. These are 4-hour courses with a 30-question test at the end. We've done them for a couple years in the past. Right now, our date for Modesto is going to be at the end of March. We'll be sending out a postcard and an email. Just some other things you might want to look into, or just, I guess, a reminder that your CCAs can sign off on this. So this is an alternative method where you can self-certify your own plan. And remember, you can only self-certify plans that you're actually doing the active farming on. So you can't self-certify for a neighbor if you're not actively farming.
And that's in high vulnerability areas only that need that certification.
Yes, low vulnerability areas don't need this. So you'll notice the little check boxes on your cover page there. Anyway, you can always check the East San Joaquin website, your portal calendar, and these will always have the updated dates. And this curesworks.org is a great site for these nitrogen management plan self-certification courses. This will list all of the courses that are happening in the Central Valley at any given time. And it also is a great resource to look up continuing education courses that are coming up. So if you follow the curesworks.org site, click on nitrogen management plans, and then click on continuing education, you can sign up for emails, and that'll email you anytime there's an upcoming course. So just a reminder that you need 3 hours over 3 years or 1 hour per year for continuing education. Sediment erosion control plan self-certification trainings are going to happen in late April. We'll have one here in Modesto as well. Follow the ESJ website and portal for upcoming dates, and we'll send out a postcard and email about this as well. And just a reminder that once you're self-certified, there's no continuing education required for sediment and erosion control plan self-certification courses. So once you're certified, you are certified for life.
Okay, we're going to change gears here a little bit. We're going to start talking about some surface water. Every year we need to talk about surface water results. I just want to remind you that, and this is on page 17 of your annual report, that we now monitor for pesticides differently than we used to in the old days. We had a long list of pesticides that we had to monitor every year. But we weren't finding many of those pesticides. And so there was a process that we worked through, and now we have a new method, and that method basically uses the environmental fate, the use in the watershed, the quantity applied, its toxicity, and so on. And we now monitor for all of the pesticides basically that are used in the watershed. And what that means is that in the past, if you use something that wasn't tested, you were sort of fairly safe. Nowadays, there's no safe. Everybody's pesticide use is monitored if there's a possibility of having that pesticide end up in the water. Okay, so our surface water monitoring program, just as a quick reminder, we have what we call a representative monitoring program. We have 6 zones. There are a couple of monitoring zones up here in Stanislaus County. Each zone has 2 core sites. We monitor one core site for 2 years, and then we move to the next core site for the next 2 years, and then we move back. We have what are called represented sites, and represented sites are monitored irregularly, and we end up having to monitor at those sites when we have problems at our core sites. And a problem is defined as either finding toxicity in the water. We have organisms that we have to test our water against and see whether they live. Or we find a chemical in the water at a concentration higher than the state allows. So those 2 things constitute a problem. And if we have a problem at a core site, we then have to go to represented sites and monitor those sites at the same months that the problem occurred at our core site. If the problem persists, in other words, if we have that same problem twice within 3 years, we're required to develop a management plan, which is a written plan that we include in our reports every year, and it tells the regional board how we're going to fix that problem. And we have a very short time to fix the problem. I'm going to show you some things here in a second. But what it also requires then is additional monitoring, and we have to have 3 years of monitoring with no problems before we can be done with our management plan. So from our old list, we still have about 9 pesticides that we have to monitor, but we have 38 new pesticides that we're now monitoring. The ones that we have found, and I'm going to show you another figure here in just a minute, are the pyrethroids, bifenthrin, lambda-cyhalothrin, and cypermethrin. Those are the trade names are there. And we still have issues with the organophosphate pesticide. Lorsban is the pesticide, the active ingredient is chlorpyrifos. Now, out of the 38 pesticides that we've been looking for, we have found the three pyrethroids that I showed you on the previous slide. And here's the locations. So we have Dry Creek at Church, Prairie Flower, Highline Canal, and then Duck Slough farther to the south. But what you see is that we're having lots of bifenthrin that we're finding. The problem with pyrethroids, bifenthrin in particular, is that it's not always it's available for all kinds of uses. Anybody can go to a big box store. You go to Home Depot or and you can buy bifenthrin. And so it's used by lots and lots of different entities. But in our watersheds, we know that it's used by members in the watershed. Okay, so here's the results. And what you see is actually, this is actually pretty darn good. We always have our standard problems with dissolved oxygen, which is the DO, pH, which is the acidity, and SC, which is the conductivity. E. coli, so the bacteria, we do have lots of problems with bacteria. Prairie flower drain is perennially a problem with bacteria. We have ammonia, we have nitrate, we have one copper problem, and then we have some toxicity. The nice thing that this is for 2017 to 18, the nice thing that you'll see there is that in this region there is no, Stanislaus County, no chlorpyrifos, okay, no pesticides. And that is that's all basically a result of your hard work and your efforts to keep these things out of the water. Okay, so I told you a little earlier if we have these problems, there are management plans. When we started thinking about this, we 2008 and 9, we ended up with 110 management plans in the first 2 years. Since that time, we've had about 26. The line there that you see with the numbers on top, the 33, the 8, and so on, those are the numbers of management plans that we have completed. In other words, we've demonstrated to the regional board that water quality is improved. We no longer have to monitor for those constituents in those water bodies. And so if you do the arithmetic there, there's about 90 some of them that have been completed. We're still working. But what you see is that every year we may trigger 1 or 2, but we're getting rid of 10, 18. We're getting rid of a lot more than we're triggering. What we want to do is make sure we don't trigger anything, and then just kind of get rid of the rest of those management plans. But in general, surface water quality, as it was last year and the year before, continues to be pretty good.
Okay, I'm going to answer a question quick, but if you have more, raise your hand, and Brittany will make her way over to you. So the question was about water use efficiency and nitrogen use efficiency. There's been a lot of work done on answering those questions recently, and that's an excellent question, because that's what it's going to come down to. How efficiently are we putting on the nitrogen so that tree or crop uses every bit of it that was applied in a way that improves our yields and we grow a good crop? Extreme example is my dad back in the 60s put on 2 slugs of nitrogen on our peaches and nectarines. He did 100 pounds in the spring and 100 pounds in the fall. Well, that's not a very efficient way to apply nitrogen, because that's way more than the tree can use in October for sure, and the winter rains might wash it down. And then at the beginning of the season, that tree can't take all that nitrogen up. The other extreme that we have now is called spoon feeding through drip systems and micro systems. Those have proven to be the highest efficiency way to put nitrogen on, where you do a little bit at a time throughout the growing season. Same story with irrigation efficiency. In fact, the big trailer you see over there, part of what that's all about is how do we improve our irrigation efficiency? And that's not only the amount of water you put on at one time, but you think of your 40-acre field with a drip system, is all those drippers putting on the same amount, the micro sprayers putting on the same amount. The more uniform and efficient you are, that's going to increase your water use efficiency and your nitrogen application efficiency. Because if you're putting on too much over here with water, you're likely putting on too much more nitrogen than you need in that particular area. That is certainly going to be a focus of our commodity groups, and Almond Board's doing a great job with that in their calculators they have online. But that is where we're all going to, similar to what we did 40 years ago when we first started looking at integrated pest management, is we now understand our bugs when they wake up in the morning or when they're adults. We know exactly when they're most susceptible for control. So we're heading in that same direction with nitrogen fertilizers. Go ahead, Mike.
Okay, so there is a question here that says, is surface water quality better because there's less flood and more pump? I think that may be a small part of it. Is, water gets scarce and everybody becomes, you put in systems that, drip and microspray and things like that as opposed to flood. There's less tailwater discharge. There's still some, but there's less tailwater discharge in general. But I think that actually a large part of the improvement is because of reduction in drift. This was one of the things that Perry, we sat in 2008 and 9 and kind of puzzled over our water quality numbers and sort of looked at the concentrations that we had in the water. And Perry said, it looks to me like a lot of this is a drift issue. And so I don't know if you've been here in the years past, but Perry's talked a lot about drift, controlling drift. And I think that in a large part, reduction in drift has really contributed to improvement in water quality, surface water quality.
Yeah, and the point on that is we're measuring at parts per trillion. It doesn't take a lot of drift to get into a waterway before we start finding it. And even those numbers are going lower now. So if there's no more questions, we'll ask Bob Ditto from the Regional Water Board to come forward. Is that one?
If we do our part and we get that figure to 1 The problem that we have we addressed? The problem that I see, and I've been involved in some situations with this, is the underground rivers and the flow. And the more you suck out of the ground, the more the water has to come from other areas. It's my understanding in the valley, these underground rivers run from east to west, pretty much to the San Joaquin River. How do we control the thousands and thousands of acres to the east of us with lagoons, stockpiling manure, dead trees, rotting, putting nitrogen into the ground? And these rivers run, and I've done some research on it, from basically east to west. I was in a situation years ago with a small 9-acre orchard, and I put very little nitrogen on because the trees were basically done for. Got involved in a lawsuit with several ranchettes to the east of me and a big mobile home park. Too much nitrogen in their water. Yet I was hardly putting anything on, and if these underground rivers do run from east to west, how are we going to monitor this? I mean, you could do your due diligence and be putting it just as best you can, but then you suck your water for your house 100 feet down, and it's too high.
Yeah, I mean, without a doubt, I think what you're pointing out is our aquifers are immensely complicated. I mean, we're just at the tip of the iceberg, if you will, or the beginning of a long determination of the variability we have in the valley. And you know, we'll be working with a water board to get these concepts understood by them and us as well. How we deal with them is, you know, the youngsters in this audience, we've got a lot of years. We're going to need your brain power to help us figure out how to move forward with this. I just know that when we talk to the water board and the activists, what we're trying to do is show that we are implementing source control. We're going to be as efficient as we can. We try to improve our applications and our water use as much as we can. And the rest, the hydrogeology, it's just going to have to work itself out. I'm not sure what else we do. And on one more point, the dairy industry is regulated. Their regs are about to be renewed again, so there is a lot of pressure on the dairy guys to manage their nitrates as well.
A question for you. Getting back to what he's talking about, because water does move from the east to the west. What I'm seeing is that no matter what we do, we're all as a group, and we're not singled out. And so that one person who is not putting nitrogen into the water because he doesn't have it on the surface of the soil is still going to be thrown into the group and still be under the wing of the state. So what I'm asking is this: what is wrong with a 3 to 6 foot probe on a person's property in several places? Because if I'm not putting nitrogen, high levels of nitrogen on the surface, I'm not putting it in the ground. So let's say that the nitrogen is coming from the east, from the city, from other facilities because of sewage and so forth. Then if I'm not putting it on the surface and it's not going past 3 to 6 feet down, it's not going to my water below me, so I should be released from that program. And I'm also complying with what's going on. Is there going to be a program put together like that to where they will come out, test your topsoils and stuff, to where if you're not over-fertilizing, then you're not complying or you're not putting nitrogen to the bottom, and they could find the source that way?
Yes, what you're talking about is certainly what we're going to try to put in the mix. We want to put in the mix. That's what the applied and the yield is going to help us do. The probes in the ground can help, but what the idea with coming up with the numbers that you're going to see in your probe, it's been shown with these studies where we do those, it's called suction lysimeters. You put them around in a field and you monitor the amount of water and nitrate put in, and then you capture that water. we're being able to look at the numbers that you have with your A-R without putting a probe in, and you can get a fairly good estimate of how much potential leaching is there. But you got the other thing that's disconnected from what you're doing is the trend monitoring. I think it's well understood, hydrogeologists will tell you this all the time, is that groundwater that you're under your farm is the neighbor upstream upgrading of you. It's not necessarily what's going on with you. The trend monitoring is to track the overall trends of what's going on in the aquifer. And we have a lot to learn. Everybody's got a lot to learn on this area because it's invisible. You can't see these aquifers, but the monitoring itself is very expensive as well. So stay tuned is all I can say. Certainly don't have answers for all of those questions.
Yes, good morning. On your board, do you have a board member who is an MD or a PhD in biochemistry?
We have a consultant that has a PhD in not biochemistry.
Okay. The next question then is, what are the symptoms? Have they followed the symptoms of, say, you said 10 is a acceptable level of nitrogen. Let's say your property has a level of 15. What symptoms do these people exhibit for this increase? Who's following that?
Well, that's going to be a water board question to answer. And let me back up. So yes, Bill McKinney has a PhD in chemistry. He's on our board of directors, has been there since day one. Very bright gentleman that we have helping us out. But that you're... Okay, we'll have Bob answer that. That's going to be the drinking water program. And before Bob starts, I just want you to understand the reason Bob's here is when this order was being negotiated, we insisted, the coalitions insisted, we're not doing the domestic well tracking, monitoring, et cetera. We have so much on our plates right now that to take this on is an enormous undertaking. So the regional board is implementing the domestic well sampling, same thing that's going on in the Central Coast for the last 5 years. So that's the reason why Bob's here today, and it's a domestic well program with the regional water board. So Bob?
Okay, so the new requirements are for coalition members to sample their on-farm drinking water wells for nitrates. So the purpose of the monitoring is to first identify those wells that have nitrate concentrations exceeding the drinking water standard, and secondly, to notify those users of the potential health risks. So in middle December, we sent out an outreach package to members, included a quick guide for members, member information form, a notification template, an informational trifold. We updated our website to include sampling requirements, available forms, frequently asked questions, and available labs. So what are the sampling requirements? So members are required to sample their on-farm drinking water wells annually. The sample results should be reported as nitrate plus nitrite as nitrogen. You're required to use an ELAP laboratory certified for testing nitrates, and up to 5 years of past data may be used. So in terms of the sample results, so if you're less than 8 milligrams per liter of nitrate plus nitrate as nitrogen, for 3 consecutive years, your monitoring frequency will change to once every 5 years. If you're between 8 and 10 milligrams per liter, you'll continue to sample annually. And if you're over 10 milligrams per liter, there is a notification requirement, but no further sampling. So the permit requires you to sample annually, and so the monitoring frequency does reduce if you are under 8. So the drinking water standard is 10 milligrams per liter. So members do not have to sample if the drinking water is not used for human consumption. So what we require is that you have some sort of documentation that you're not using the well for drinking if it comes to a point that we're asking you if you are using your well. So here's the drinking water well member information form. So this is what you're going to fill out and take to the lab with your sample and chain of custody. In here, the laboratory will create an account for you that will enter your results into GeoTracker, which is the state's groundwater database. it'll create a global ID for you. So each well will have a global ID number. So next year sampling should be a bit easier. You'll just have to use that global ID number when you take your sample into the lab. So the results do need to be entered into GeoTracker by the laboratory. So this is the notification template. This was designed to notify users of the potential health risks of drinking the water. So the member's responsibility is if your results exceed 10 milligrams per liter, you have 10 days to notify the user of this water using this form. You sign it and also send a copy into the Central Valley Water Board. If your family is the only one drinking the water, you just need to sign it and send this notification into the Central Valley Water Board. What if you're over 10 milligrams per liter and our tenants refuse to sign and acknowledge the report? It's the member's responsibility to sign it. The member's responsibility is just to notify the user of the potential health risks. The member is signing the notification and sending it to the Central Valley Regional Water Board. So what we're going to do, we're going to look at the data that comes into GeoTracker, and anyone who's over the drinking water standard is what we'll do is ensure that we received a notification.
So Bob, why don't you address this gentleman's question about the health effects of nitrates, or what is that?
So in terms of the most vulnerable populations for nitrates, and this notification template has pregnant women and infants.
In these areas that have problems, there was no mention of reverse osmosis. Is that not cost effective? Is it better to bring bottled water in?
Well, this program is focused on the monitoring requirement. So how you treat the water is completely up to you. So yes, reverse osmosis systems do work.
Well, I'm thinking of these communities.
Yes, so for a treatment system, RO is one of the few things you can use to get nitrates out. But as far as cleaning up the aquifer, that's what I was referring to before. We have these massive aquifers with nitrates. It's not efficient to pump it up and just treat it and put it back in the groundwater or tank it. But as far as an in-home system, Culligan has systems that, the one thing you got to remember about RO is your salts content in your water will dictate how much waste stream that you have and how frequently you have to change those filters. So if you've got clean water, no salts, and nitrate, they'll go without service for months and months. But if you have a high TDS in your water, that really loads up the filters in a reverse osmosis. So you need to be aware of that ROs they work, but you really got to track them. You got to make sure that they're serviced regularly and taken care of.
Your statement that you have to keep the water receipts, a lot of the people in here, myself included, live on the property and drink that water. But I've got reverse osmosis. I also have a resin system to remove the nitrates. I test that once a year along with everything else, and if it's okay, fine. I change the filters once a year and it's fine. You didn't mention any of that.
Oh, that's fine, sir. Those were just examples. So yes, exactly what you said. If you can just prove that you're not drinking the water or the water is treated, yeah, that's fine.
But you don't want that data.
No, this program isn't requesting that data, no. So here's a list of available labs. We also have printed out copies as you came in today. So there's a frequently asked questions as well.
Yeah, so we got the question. I don't know how to answer it. I'll just recite it. So how do you know when a sample's brought into the lab that it's your well? Well, you can have the lab come and take the sample and you know that it's coming out of your well. But other than that, it's on the honor system. Oh, and there's a chain of custody letter that you have, or form that needs to be filled out by whoever takes that sample. Is that?
That's correct. And then I think it says if you're above 10, why is there no further sampling? So you've identified that the well is above the drinking water standard, so therefore there's a notification requirement. The program doesn't go further than that. Yes, so is GeoTracker anonymous? In terms of GeoTracker, the public data will be listed as an APN and the nitrate concentration. All your member information is for regional board use, not for public.
Yes, hello. My question is, every well on the farm has to be tested if it's a drinking water well?
If it's used for drinking water, yes.
And if we're next to the city, That doesn't count. You have to do each well.
If can you
We
repeat
live
that?
right next to Oakdale. Can we use Oakdale numbers?
Yeah, you don't, if it's city water, then you don't have to test it. It's this individual domestic well on your farm on the APN that is in the coalition. So if you're getting city water, then no, you don't have to test it, right?
No.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Okay, any other questions while we're getting ready to wrap up here?
Yeah, so the question is basically where do you grab the sample? So you should be grabbing it before the filtration system, so as close to the pressure tank as possible.
And if possible, before the pressure tank. Go ahead over here.
Yes, if you have a leasehold interest on a ranch and there's the landlords, if you will, have a homestead that's there and you have no right the use of that piece of property and there's a domestic well on it, is that still your responsibility, or is that it's not part of your leasehold? How does that work?
If the member is leasing the parcel, the member's responsibility is to notify the owner of the requirements.
But I'm not leasing that part where that domestic well is, but it's in the same APN number, if you will.
So if the domestic well is located on the enrolled APN, then it's required to be sampled. So your requirement would be to notify that owner of the requirements.
But it'll be his responsibility to test it, not mine.
That is correct.
Thank you.
Now, if that house has a different APN than the farm property, it's not required to be sampled. No, I understand you had the same, but again, if you do have a parcel split with a house, then it's not part of the irrigated lands program.
So another question, if you're over 10 milligrams per liter, does the farmer have to provide water to the tenant until the levels are controlled? And at this point, we recommend that replacement water is given, but it's not a requirement of the permit. The requirement is to monitor the well and notify those users of the potential health risks.
And that's the same as Salinas Valley or Central Coast where they have that requirement. It's not required to provide bottled water, but I tell you, the growers are doing that. So you got a question here, sir?
Yes, I do. Right here, over here to your left. So I just had a quick question too about when your county changes the standards of requirements. How as far as the coalition adjust, basically be able to, address that issue, changing the standards so many years on, on your water and stuff like that. Like in 2006, it got changed in Merced County as far as the water requirements.
Well, I'm not really familiar with the county requirements. And are you talking about?
Yeah.
Oh, the 45 is just a different way to look at the number. And
yeah, that's the way you report it. 45 is nitrate as nitrate. 10 milligrams per liter is nitrate plus nitrite as nitrogen. So you're reporting as nitrogen, not as nitrate.
Right.
Those are two equivalent numbers, though.
Right.
So there's a way to convert that number.
All right, everybody, thank you. We got one more question. Oh, yeah, the young man over here. Go ahead. Backflow preventers on a domestic well are not required by the Irrigated Lands Program or the Water Board, but the county may have something to say about that. I'm not sure what the county ordinance is on that. I don't know. Sorry. Yes. Go ahead, young man.
So say you have an almond orchard, and over a course of years, you find the average production of those almonds. What would be the formula that you plug that into to find how much nitrogen you need for that year? Then
how much you would need? That would be something out of the documents that we prepared.
Mm-hmm.
But the 68 pounds per 1,000 pounds of nut meats is the highest efficiency. But
Okay.
again, we talked about nitrogen use efficiency. If you got 100% efficiency, that should give you a good crop. But not many crops can say I'm 100% efficiency.
So if you find it like an average, would that be a good place to aim around?
Yes, I think that's good. And talk to a CCA. I mean, a certified crop advisor can help you a lot on those kind of questions.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then we have a lot of lunch over there for 800 people, so please help yourself to the lunch on your way out. Thank you for coming today.